record on this.
Okay, we're back on 1+1. Sorry about that, audience. We got interrupted by Zoom. I need to upgrade my Zoom. But anywho, so Jesus, so you were talking about let's start the question all over again. So there was a body of government called the National Assembly, which several years ago, the opposition, the right-wing opposition, the Western-backed right-wing opposition, won very big. And instead of doing what people should be doing in government, which is regardless of whether you disagree with the ruling party and whatnot, you at least have to work with whichever government to make sure that people's basic needs are met and whatnot. But this opposition very much you can sort of compare it to the Republican opposition when Obama was in power. Their only goal was to sabotage. And in response to that, the Maduro government decided that it was going to strengthen participatory democracy and direct democracy. So they had what was called a constituent assembly or constitutional assemblies, local constitutional assemblies to bypass the National Assembly. National Assembly in response was saying that the government was acting very dictatorial. And there was violent opposition known as Garimbas, which Alfred Zayas, when he was on the program, in his reports and his reporting on Venezuela and the impact of sanctions on Venezuela, he described the opposition in Venezuela as being very much like the right-wing opposition of Salvador Allende and other Latin American governments, and he described their actions as well as Western sanctions as very much like what happened in Chile, making the economy scream. And but my question though is while it's all good to strengthen direct democracy, to have more participatory democracy in a place like Venezuela, it doesn't matter, because if you have a Western-backed opposition, and because Venezuela's economy is largely fossil fuel driven and mining driven, oil and whatnot, isn't it time that the Maduro government, or whichever left-wing government, when it gets into power in a country like Venezuela or Bolivia, isn't it time that they start doing their own Green New Deal and start to pursue more eco-socialist policies? Even though there are issues though when it comes to renewable energy, because a lot of it depends on mining. And so talk to us about that, both you and Saheli.
Yes. Let me try to resume from where I got caught at before. And I was telling you at that moment that Maduro's decision of calling for the Constituent Assembly was absolutely legal, and it was a necessary step. Because I mean, even what you just said about Venezuelan opposition being similar to the Republicans in the US is like too soft for a right-wing opposition. I mean, really, and I believe that a lot of people in the North, in the US, Canada, even leftists, in Europe also, they tend to compare, other political phenomena outside their, regional limitations to the local realities. But what happened in Venezuela is way beyond rationality and way beyond the, political rationality that happened in the North.
Yeah.
And it's very similar to what you mentioned about Chile. In that case, I completely agree with you, because I mean, for those ones that knows history, they should know that the right-wingers in Chile at the time of Salvador Allende did everything possible, and the impossible, I'm talking about insurrectional things in order to get rid of that presidency. So that's what happened in Venezuela. That what has been happening in Venezuela since 2002, 2001, when Hugo Chavez took office. And the opposition realized that they were not going to be able to domesticate him, to how do you say, to tame him or something like that. So in that sense, the reality of Venezuela sometimes is like not very well seen from the north, and of course it is also that perception is also facilitated by right-wing mainstream media that reproduce this authoritarianism and this whatever smearing campaigns against Venezuela to try to present us like the bad guys in the neighborhood, when in reality Chavismo and the Bolivarian Revolution is, if you ask me, one of the most peaceful and most democratic political revolutions that I have known of, not only in contemporary history, at least in the region, but all over, I mean. So in that sense, the explanation of that that decision of Maduro have to be framework, within that analysis. So what happened after that Constituent Assembly elections? That Chavismo, of course, won the majority of that Constitutional Assembly because the opposition boycotted the assembly, and then we enter into a peaceful, I mean, all the guarimbas disappear, all the violent protests promoted by the right-wingers disappear, and we enter into a new phase of more rationality, a little bit more of rationality in the political debate in Venezuela, until 2019, when the US and the European compass of the US decided to promote this crazy idea of Guaido and the interim government and all that craziness that they promoted, just thinking that Maduro was going to last 2 weeks or 4 weeks, when in reality that is not what happened. So that's like the general perspective of that particular moment in Venezuelan history, when Maduro called for the Constituent Assembly, and now connecting that to the question of the the economical, structure of Venezuela. As I told you before, I mean, Venezuela, as many countries in the South, have the economic structure that most of the time was imposed on them by the countries in the north. In our case, we didn't need to produce oil in 1910 or 1912 when we started producing oil in Venezuela, because we barely had cars then in Venezuela. But it was Rockefeller, and the one that needed oil and start exploring oil in Venezuela, and then all the U.S. Imperialism apparatus started to push towards changing the economic structure of Venezuela, that was very agricultural, very similar to the economic apparatus that Colombia have right now, disregarding the drugs, of course. and we were mainly producers of coffee, coca, and cocoa, sorry, and other agricultural, crops. So everything was changed due to the U.S. Interest. And that's important it's very important to analyze that also in the North, even among our leftist friends, because there is this trend in the left in the North that everything has to be green, and that we need to respect the environment. But you in the North talk about those things after you destroy most of the green around the world to achieve your development. So you now want to impose that to the South. I mean, using a very nice argument, but restricting the developing capabilities that some countries might have. And I always, raise that, not because I want to oppose the green, approach towards, the world, which I respect and I agree with. But just because to let people in the North understand that it's nice to try to get, ecologically friendly economy, but of course, it is very easy to understand and to achieve that in countries in the North with all the money that they made after destroying the environment, their environment, and then now, the guys in the North want us to not destroy the environment just because you need to destroy them for us later. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So it's kind of a complicated scene. But going back to your question again, I have to tell you that these particularly illegal US and European sanctions have teach us in Venezuela that we can survive the dependency of oil on oil. And it's very clear for many people that has been coming to Venezuela from abroad, especially in these recent elections and last year parliamentary elections, to see that Venezuelan economy is doing better. It's not perfect, but it's doing better than in 2019 or 2018 or 17, where the economy was a mess. And we have achieved that in the middle of the most and of the worst economic sanctions that this country have ever had in its history, and without all the resources that we had before from oil, because most of the Venezuelan oil production activity has been sanctioned and basically declared illegal by the US and Europe. So we have been having less, at least in 2019 and 2020, the income of Venezuela, the revenue due to oil activities that enter Venezuela was 1% of what was in 2018, I believe. So that gives you an idea of how important is. Imagine that in Belgium, some country comes and tells you you cannot export, diamonds or whatever other important activity that you have up there, and to sustain the Belgian economy. And you have to live with 1% of the income that you had the year before. That's tough. That's not easy. And we managed we have been able to bypass, to surpass that difficulty. And a lot of people say that we were going to die because we didn't produce enough food. And here we are. And we have plenty of food that we produce. We don't need too much of imports in order to feed ourselves, and there's a lot of economic activity happening right now, and I'm optimistic, if you ask me. And besides all the vaccines related to US and European sanctions, besides the negative effects that it has on, especially on the most vulnerable in Venezuela, the economy is showing signs that we can move in a direction different than fossil fuels. But again, that doesn't mean that because of the desire of a group of Illuminati in the North, we are going to stop depending, using what we already had to help, develop our economy. What I'm trying to tell you is that the oil is going to remain there, and we are going to keep using it as much as possible, but with the consciousness of, not being so dependent on it, to avoid new, disruptions due to US sanctions or anything. But beyond that, to try to diversify our economy, which is absolutely necessary in any country. Sorry for talking that long.
No.
I don't know. I don't know if is Saheli gonna add something to that.
No, actually, this is one of the questions that comes up all the time. That, especially, like Jesus was saying, from the north, they say that how come Venezuela is going to develop a socialist model or whatever it may be, if Venezuela is such an oil exporting country. Now, first, let me point out something, that in neither in the list of the most polluting countries or most greenhouse gas emitting countries does Venezuela appear. It does not, nor in the per capita list. Okay, so Venezuela is not really a greenhouse gas emitting country in the world. Like, it does not appear in the top 50. The US does.
Interesting.
Canada does. Interestingly, Canada is the top first per capita greenhouse gas emitting country in the world, and followed by the US. But in this case, like in these calculations, all the wars that US does around the world is not taken into account. That is, like, the US Army is like more polluting than 130 countries combined in the world.
Yeah.
So these things, when the, like, even I'm saying that people who are saying these are like good-minded people, most of them are, and want good for everyone. Even these people, they do not really, when they're saying Venezuela exports oil, or like Venezuela is an exporter of primary material for industries, they do not really take these things into account. So this is something that Giraldino Colotti, who is an Italian leftist, American leftist, recently called the green conscience of the rich. Okay, and she said this in association with the COP26 that was happening in Glasgow, where all these polluting countries, the most polluting countries, were telling others that they should stop using coal, that they should stop using thermal power, they should stop doing this or that. Now, let us remember also that according to international law, the right to development is a fundamental right of all nations. So Venezuela does have the right to use its own natural resources. And the fact that Venezuela is an exporter of primary material, like Jesus said, is not really the
I need to
decision
do
of
something to
Venezuela.
get you a Venezuelan passport, Sahil.
The fact, anyway, the fact that Venezuela exports natural resources to developed economies is not really the fault of Venezuela. Just like a few days ago, Luis Arce, the president of Bolivia, was in UK at the University of Warwick giving this speech, and he did say that the fact that Bolivia also exports natural resources to Europe, to the US, lithium is such a, in fact, lithium was the reason why the coup took place in Bolivia. So he was saying that the fact that Bolivia also, and many countries, like all the countries of the global south that have natural resources, that export natural resources to the developed economies, are not really due to their own decision, but due to the centuries of colonialism that they suffered, that they could not, like, the colonialists really, what do? They did not develop the countries that they colonized. They just extracted resources from them. And at present, it's the same thing. It's neo-colonialism. Like, countries have their own governments, but really they cannot be independent, even not even socialist economies, because they have to work in a capitalist system of economy, the international one, right? So even all countries, when Cuba has to, Cuba is the most, it is said that Cuba is the most like greenest economy in the world, like the most sustainable economy in the world. Many people say that is because Cuba does not produce anything, does not have much anyway, and there has been 60 years an ongoing blockade, the longest in history. Still, the fact remains that it has to import oil to use in its thermal power stations as well as in its other industries. It has nickel that its own nickel that it like uses, okay? So like it mines its own nickel with the help of Canadian and European companies but they're like force these companies to give them what is called green technology in order to reduce the environmental impact. So Venezuela can do the same. In fact, there was this Canadian company, Crystal X, doing like in the Orinoco belt in a gold mine. It was doing pollution, and it was because of this that it was, because of other reasons also, but because especially because of pollution, it was expropriated by the government of Venezuela, and because of which there has been a 15-year case going on in the US. Crystal X is saying that it expropriated illegally, which is not true. The Constitution of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela does give the government the right to expropriate its natural resources, because the natural resources belong to the people. So because it belongs to the people, it will be for the people of these countries to decide how they will use the resources, and not the former colonizers coming back and telling us to use our resources in the way they want. So that's something. And another thing that Jesus said, that Venezuela produces a lot of its own food. There is a concrete number. It's close to 72% of Venezuela's own food consumption is produced in Venezuela. Now, in these cases, we should also remember something, that not all countries have the climate or the soil or topography to produce everything that they need, right? So like Venezuela can produce some things, it cannot be able to geographically, for geographical reasons, produce other things, and has to import. And this is true for each and every country in the world. So just going local would not solve the problem either. So like there should be exchange of goods and materials among countries with the aim of reducing the environmental impact. The first that these people who are saying that Venezuela should do this or that should force their own governments to do something about not going to war, about not imposing sanctions also, because sanctions is also one of the reasons that this is derail economies, right? And it's not like Venezuela was just dependent on oil or just selling oil to survive. Venezuela still has a afforestation program that was severely hit because of the sanctions. So these things have to be remembered. So it's like sanctions not only kill people, wars not only kill people, they also destroy the environment. So those who are trying to tell Venezuela or whichever other country that they should do this or do that in order to like have a more green economy or Green New Deal or whatever it is, should first force their own governments to have those Green New Deals.
And a quick follow-up, you both brought up a very interesting point, and it was a very contentious issue at the last COP26 in Glasgow. Many leaders and many leaders of, I hate that term, of the developing world, but many African delegates, Latin American delegates, Asian delegates, and their environmental ministers and their environmental activists brought up the issue of what's called climate debt. So a lot of them were saying, hey, we would all love to use renewable energy. We would all love to adopt a Green New Deal, for our respective countries, but we are not the ones that are the cause of all of the climate crisis. It's you guys in the West who use our resources for your big multinational corporations, who are the biggest polluters. And of course, militarism was never brought up at the last COP26. So there's this issue of the climate debt saying, hey, okay, let's all work together. But you, the biggest polluters of Canada, Britain, Australia, the European Union, NATO nations, the US, you guys should be the ones to clean up most of the mess, since most of the climate crisis was started by your corporations. And of course, that's linked to imperialism. So I'm really glad that I'm really glad that you both brought that up. So let's move on to one quick follow-up question. Then my last on Venezuela before we talk about Nicaragua is Jesus and Saheli, why is it that so much of the Western left has jumped the shark on Venezuela? Why is it that when you know that many people, when you explain to them that what's happening in Venezuela is a war for oil, it's a war for mining, it's you know, it's Chile in the 1970s all over again, it's Argentina in the 1970s all over again. This is classic, you know, U.S. Imperialism, Canadian imperialism, British imperialism all over again. Uh, so why is it that so many people, you know, once upon a time marched against the war in Iraq, saying that it was a war for oil, but there is, but when it comes to Venezuela, and you know, both Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro, regardless of one's criticisms that they might have and legitimate criticisms that one might have. But why isn't that we don't have a big, you know, global protest movement that says no war for oil of Venezuela? And on top of that, you know, both Chavez and Maduro, unlike, you know, Gaddafi in you know in Libya, or Saddam Hussein in Iraq, who were, you know, dictatorial, but these guys are, you know, democratically elected, and yet why is it that that there's been a huge failure on the part of the Western left to push back against the imperial project in Venezuela or Nicaragua, or even, you know, or even Bolivia, where much of the Western left fell asleep at the wheel? I'm curious both your thoughts on that.
Can you, do you want to go ahead first, Ahe?
Would I? Okay, so that it is one of my questions too. That's something. Okay, so before we begin, I should like to point out something, that because you mentioned both Gaddafi and Saddam Hussein, they were very different people, that we should say. And like when in the West, democracy is discussed, the idea that democracy in which it is discussed is that after every 4, 5, 6, or 7 years, people will go out to vote and elect a head of state, and that's the end of it. But that's really not democracy. That is a facade of democracy. So, in this sense, if you talk about Libya was actually quite a democratic country, in the sense that they had this slogan, which is also in Nicaragua, which is that people is the president, or the people is the head of the state. So in case of Libya, they had this, what Venezuela also has the idea of, is that they have these people's republics, small ones, which we could call communes or something, that were the ones that also exist in Cuba, that discuss policy there, and it's all over the country. They discuss policy, and they are the ones that come up with different policies, and then they present it to the government. Then it is discussed in a national assembly. Then it is like a president signs on it, like that. That's how it happens in Cuba. And there was a similar sort of thing. I'm not saying the same, but similar sort of thing in Libya before Gaddafi was executed and the country was destroyed. So, and in this sense, Iraq was very different. Still, since you mentioned that people marched in the war against Iraq, they did not march against the war on Libya, did they? No, they supported it. Western left, especially US left, supported the war on Libya. They had not, although Libya was a more democratic country compared to Iraq. And this, I think, had to do with who, at least in case of the US, was in government. Just remember, Iraq was in 2003, and it was the mastermind of George W. Bush. So he was a Republican. And have you noticed that in case of US, at least in case of US, when the Republicans are in government, there is a lot more protest against war in general than when Democrats are. Democrats' wars are supported. Republicans' wars, well, at least until what I have seen is that Republicans' wars, at least there is some protest against it. So yes, that was one of the reasons that when Bush invaded Iraq, there were people marching against it in the streets in the US, also in Britain against Tony Blair. So then there was a big protest, like 1 million people protesting. Then when Obama overthrew the government of Honduras in 2009. Who said anything against that? It was like, just a day, a normal day. Then in 2011,
Yeah.
Obama invaded Libya. An African, like he is an African American, invaded an African country. Who said anything against that? No one. He also, like in the same year, started, like boosted the protest, the so-called of the moderate rebels in Syria, and started destroying the country. And Syria would have been in the same situation as Libya today had it not been for Russia coming in 2015 at the call of the legitimate government of Syria. One may or may not agree with their systems, but it is a legitimate government of Syria. So similarly, it was 2015, Obama in 2015 that came out with this executive order against Venezuela, say, considering Venezuela an unprecedented threat against the national security and foreign policy of the US.
Yeah.
So it was Obama who came out with that executive decision, and that is why there was no discussion in media. And since then, Venezuela has been so vilified, so demonized in press, including in so-called progressive press, and even the progressives in the US and also in UK, in other countries of Europe too, just consider Venezuela dictatorial. And a lot of the war, like it's the reason the war against Venezuela, it's a war. And the war against Venezuela is called a hybrid war, particularly because of that there is no bombing, there are no armies in Venezuela, like foreign armies coming into Venezuela, if we do not consider the Colombian paramilitaries. But anyway, that's a different issue. There is no US army, there is no like Canadian fighter jets dropping bombs in Venezuela, but there is this intense media war apart from the economic war.
Yeah.
And it is this media war that, in my opinion, has caused all this left against the left, I mean, there are other issues too. I will come to it, but this left against the left thing is a lot because of the media and also these big, like very influential international human rights organizations like Human Rights Watch, which was also quite supported, like the coup in Bolivia, calling Evo Morales dictator and whatnot, and saying that they were the ones who both sided the situation, saying that there were violence from both sides, when it was not really from both sides. It was the mass supporters of Evo Morales that were getting massacred in Bolivia. So in the same way, Amnesty International also, I have to mention, has been terrible over the situation in Venezuela, has both sided the situation in Venezuela too, and saying that like Chavistas have weapons or are killing oppositions, etc. While in the Guarimbas, it were the Chavistas who were shot, who were burnt alive.
Yeah.
So like we have to say this, that there has been this intense distortion by these influential organizations that in many cases actually supported good causes. But in this case also they support, in this case at least, they are not doing that. And these are the ones, because their reach is so big, that they are the ones, and also the language barrier is there. So these are the ones that reach the West. So even Shami Chakravarti, who was the Shadow Home Secretary of
Jeremy Corbyn.
Jeremy Corbyn, she also said that she believed her sources in Human Rights Watch when it came to the situation in Venezuela. So she was supporting Lula, but she did not support Maduro. So that's a problem. That problem exists. That is a big contradiction when it comes to supporting Venezuela, and more when in case of Nicaragua, a little less in case of Bolivia, and a lot less in case of Cuba. But in case of Cuba, Cuba had all this internationalism for such a long time that they have a place, like a sort of pedestalization, even in the West, that Venezuela, Bolivia, Nicaragua, even Nicaragua lacks. So this is like, in my opinion, this is the situation. I think I've gone on for too long, and today to say something.
No, that was
yes.
brilliant, Ed.
You cover it very well, Sahili. I would only add to what Sahili said that disregarding all the media warfare against Venezuela and anything progressive, disregarding that, I mean, that media warfare find a very good niche in the left in the north, because the left in the north is complex, to say a nice word. And
That's an
and,
understatement.
exactly. And you have everything inside the left in the north. I mean, you have liberals that love Obama and love Ocasio-Cortez, and you have the regular Marxist Leninist, but then you also have the Trotskyites, and then you have the anarchist, and then you have, I mean, you have like a big scope of, you know, alterations of Marxist Leninists that make it easy for the media, mainstream media message to reach and get into the cracks within the left and exploit as much as they can exploit all those incongruencies that you have in the left and the north. So it's a mix of things. I just wanted to add that because, I mean, it's like the campaign of, you know, a smearing campaign against Venezuela and in Bolivia or Nicaragua, but at the same time, you know, having the left in the north with too many cracks that are easy to feel by that terrible narrative of demonization of Venezuela, so, which, as Saheli said, in most cases, it is a blatant tergiversation of reality. And it's exactly, I mean, Saheli mentioned that when we talk about the protests, for example, they always say that it's the Chavistas that are the violent one, when in reality, if you ask me, and I always try to be as unbiased as my Chavismo allow me, in reality, what happened in Venezuela is the contrary. I mean, the right-wingers are the ones that promote violence in Venezuela. And we, the Chavistas, most of the time have to have a low profile in order not to be attacked by right-wingers. I'm not exaggerating here, my friend. I have, for example, red shirts that are with the Soviet, you know, the la hoz y el martillo, we say in Spanish. I forget how you say it in English. The hammer and the
Sickle.
And the sickle that I have at home and I wear at home, but I don't even dare to go to do groceries with that T-shirt outside my house. And I don't live in a very, you know, fancy neighborhood in Caracas. I live in a very regular middle class, lower middle class neighborhood in Caracas. And even in my case, I'm afraid of going outside with a shirt like that because I might be attacked, or I might be, you know, maybe right now that you know, the political violence has been gone for several months already. It's not that bad, but the reality is I don't go out with that T-shirt, with that kind of T-shirt in Venezuela. So that's to give you an idea on how distorted the reality of Venezuela and Chavismo is presented abroad.
Interesting.
This is very similar to what happened in Nicaragua in 2018.
Actually, in fact, perfect, because that's a perfect segue, which is Saheli. Yeah. Can you explain the Western War on the Democratic Socialist government of Daniel Ortega and his Sandinista party, and despite a coup attempt and economic terrorism and intense media demonization of Daniel Ortega, recent elections, the Sandinista party won. So talk about that, and again, explain how once upon a time during the 1980s there was big Nicaragua solidarity movement, an anti-imperialist movement that was pushing back against Reagan's brutal contra war on the democratically elected government of Daniel Ortega and the Sandinistas. Why again do we not see this right now, even though it is clearly the 1980s and the 1970s all over again?
Yes, in case of Nicaragua, this like the demonization is even greater. So, firstly, the thing that you hear every time is that Daniel Ortega has been in power for long. Why doesn't he leave? Like, why isn't someone else? Why don't they have someone else as a presidential candidate, for example? So the first thing is that is for the people of Nicaragua to decide, not for anyone outside. So that's one thing. And secondly, those who talk about it, they must remember that there are like some 20 countries in Europe that do not have term limits for heads of state. The fact that in those countries governments cannot exist more than 1 or 2 terms has to do with the fact that they don't really do anything for the people, right? But in case of Sandinistas, they have turned a backward country, like a very backward country. It is a very poor and one of the most unequal countries in the hemisphere into like one of the most equal ones. And and they have like a lot of things that they did not have. And since you mentioned the 80s and the Contras, let us remember that even in that violence, the Sandinistas had this literacy program going on, which at present has eliminated illiteracy from the country. And it is a lot easier to have healthcare in Nicaragua than in the US, of course. US has one of the worst healthcare systems in the developed world, maybe the worst one. So, and now you say that why was this so much support, especially from the US in the 80s, but not now? In this regard, I have heard from Nicaraguans that the people who were like at that time in Nicaragua supporting the Sandinistas, like at that time the Sandinistas were facing an armed force. The Contras were armed to the teeth with US weapons. So the Sandinistas also had to take up arms in order to defend their revolution, to defend their lives even. So that was like, that is a sort of romanticism that exists till this day to the minds of the people in the West. Now, in 1990, when Nicaraguans under duress had to elect Violeta Chamorro as the president, and then they had 16 years of neoliberalism, these people who were in the West, most of them did not go back to Nicaragua to see how Nicaraguans were suffering. Okay, yes, they had Nicaraguans then coming in droves, like migration into US and in Canada, Mexico, etc. But these people in the West, again, especially in the US, who were in Nicaragua in the 80s, did not go to Nicaragua in the 90s or like early 2000s also. So in 2006, Daniel Ortega is re-elected. Sandinistas come back to power. Now they no longer face an armed opposition. What they face is a big media opposition. Like the war has shifted from arms in the streets to much more to media, to economies, etc. So you do not really see that kind of intense street war anymore in Nicaragua, in general, nowhere, unless there is a war going on, like a hot war. So these people, they are no longer seeing those things, so that those who are still in that romanticism, this is, I get from Sophia Clark, who is a Nicaraguan and has been like her uncle was one of representatives of Nicaragua to the UN. So she explained this very well, that there is this lingering romanticism in the West who see that Daniel Ortega and Sandinistas have deviated from the path of revolution when they have not. So they think that they are no longer leftists, they are no longer socialists, just because they are not fighting, like not fighting with arms. And they have to fight still because US has sanctions. They did the NICA Act, and then now they have passed the Renacer Act, which is very similar to the sanctions that are existing against Venezuela. So Nicaragua will very soon face the sanctions that Venezuela faces. They will be expelled from the Central American Free Trade Agreement. Everything is like set for them to suffer. So even in this situation, there is like that since Ortega has been elected so many times, elected by the people of Nicaragua, But since he has been elected so many times, there is this idea that socialists do not want to leave power, that they are in a mode of power, etc. These words are used. And also there have been this, like in the 90s, just like Jesus mentioned, cracks in the left in the West, there were also cracks in the left in Nicaragua, especially among the Sandinistas. And from FSLN, this movement, like Movimiento Renovador Sandinista, broke away, called themselves the real Sandinistas. And then these were the people who, even in the 90s, like even in the years of neoliberalism, they went away to the US and Mexico, settled there, claimed themselves to be the real Sandinistas, and said that FSLN is moving away from that path of socialism. At that time, FSLN just had to keep a low profile in order to save themselves. Just like Jesus was saying that the Chavistas have to keep a low profile. And this, remember, like Chavistas have power in Venezuela. FSLN did not have power in Nicaragua in the 90s until the 2006. So just that MRS and people in the MRS, like Dora Maria Tejes, for example, she was a very famous Sandinista in the 80s. Like she was one of the frontline warriors of Sandinistas. But she went away to MRS, and then now she is one of the like biggest opponents of Ortega. So people are seeing that, okay, these are like two faces of Sandinismo, one against the other, and the one they are seeing closer. Ortega never left his country, but these people left, like people of MRS left. So they are the ones that are seen close by. So, okay, so these are the people that you hear more, see more. So there is this tendency to believe them more. And then, of course, there is all this mainstream media saying that Ortega's government, Ortega himself, or like imprisoned all these pre-candidates. Now let us remember that in the Nicaraguan electoral system, there is nothing called pre-candidates. You have to be registered with a party, and your party will elect you as the candidate for the presidency or for the National Assembly, for the Central American Parliament, even for local elections. Like you cannot be independent or anything in Nicaragua. You have to have a political organization behind you that will pose you as the person who will represent them. So that's one thing. And secondly, it was not the government, it was not the executive that imprisoned these people. It was the judiciary. So the problems that they had was that they received money from USAID, from National Endowment for Democracy, from European governments, including the Embassy of Norway, that this money from them, and they used this in political campaigns. Now, there is this law in Nicaragua, which is very similar to the Foreign Agents Registration Act in the US, that you cannot use foreign money in political or internal affairs. You can use foreign money in social affairs. So you can have NGOs doing social work. You can use that money there, but not in political work. These people were doing that. And then they also laundered that money. That's when this law came about. Cristiana Chamorro, who is the daughter of Violeta Chamorro, she just took out the money from the bank account of the foundation and then put it in her own. So this is blatant money laundering. So these were the charges that are against her, against Felix Maradiaga, against all other people. So the charges that they have against them are many economic, like this financial irregularities that they did. And then there is also betraying the nation, which is like taking foreign money and using it in political campaigns against the government. And also, like I always insist this everywhere, that no government in the world should participate in its own overthrow. They should not. So whatever government that might be, left, right, center, extreme, whatever they might be, no government should participate in its own overthrow. So the government of Daniel Ortega, the Sandinistas, have every right not to participate in their own overthrow, every right to save their government, right? And so there were opposition candidates. There were 5 opposition candidates against Ortega in the elections. Like they were given the candidacies by the electoral authority of Nicaragua. So it's not like the government had like no opposition, or there were no one, like if the government had no opposition, then why did it receive like 72 or 73% of the votes? What happened to the other percentages? Who got them? That should be the question, right? So these other opposition candidates got them. It is not like Nicaraguans do not have democracy. They have like more democracy and more grassroots and local level democracy than there is in the US. A third of the lands of Nicaragua is deeded to the indigenous communities of Nicaragua. In the Caribbean coast of Nicaragua, which was a British colony, like it is an autonomous region. They have two autonomous regions, North Caribbean and South Caribbean, autonomous regions where they have their own autonomous parliaments and everything, and like they have their own laws as long as they are not against the laws of the nation. So this sort of autonomy, or this sort of indigenous communities owning lands, or African communities owning lands, is a dream in the US, right? This is what is all the land back movement is about, right? So the government of Nicaragua has already done it and is in the process of doing it. And like it recognizes all indigenous languages, and like every person has the right to study in his or her own language. Everything is like this sort of thing exists. They have a cultural conservation that other countries should learn from, instead of being so aggressive against them. So these are the achievements, apart from all the health ones or educational ones that do not get mentioned, and instead like Ortega gets projected as this dictatorial figure. Whereas it's not just the president that takes all the decisions. It is all these, the decision comes from these communities. Decisions come from the cooperatives. They come from the local parliaments. So just the fact that Ortega has been elected president 5 times, starting from the 70s, does not mean that it is a dictatorial country. It's more democratic than most of the countries that pretend to be democracies.
Thank you so
You
much
need
for
also
that.
a Nicaraguan passport.
Well, we'll definitely help out with that. I would definitely love to help out with that, and I would also love to apply for Venezuelan or Nicaraguan citizenship. Thank you so much for that, Saheli. And before I get to my last question, can either of you briefly, if it's even possible, explain what is happening in Peru, Bolivia, and Honduras? Because Honduras also had a big election and a big political earthquake happen, which is the left won, the right-wing narco-backed dictatorship lost. And so, yeah, so talk to us briefly, if it's possible, about what's happening in Peru, Bolivia, and the recent elections in Honduras.
Let me try to do it briefly, Saheli, and if I miss something, just get in. First, talking about Peru, I was very excited by the victory of Pedro Castillo, as many leftists should have been, but very fast, Pedro Castillo, in my opinion, has been showing. I mean, you have to take into account that the victory of Pedro Castillo was very precarious, especially when you put it in terms of the balance of power within the Congress, the Peruvian Congress. So in that sense, I have the impression that Castillo has been too weak trying to push his agenda and submitting too much to the decisions taken by the Congress that has like a majority. I don't remember very well the numbers, but have a majority of right wingers. So in that, and you have to count also that there are some cracks within Peru Libre Party that supported Pedro Castillo. So that make the parliamentary situation for Pedro Castillo more complicated. But anyways, I still believe that he needed to push harder his agenda, especially the agenda of the Constituent Assembly, which was one of his main uh, electoral promises, and 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 I believe that pushing that agenda forward in a smart way might help us even bypass the current, status quo in the parliament. At least that's what happened in Venezuela. I mean, when Hugo Chavez took power and promoted of course, we had a better correlation of forces within the Congress than in Venezuela, but uh, I mean, it was not perfect neither. But Chavez was wise enough to move in all the levels, in the political arena, in the media arena, in all the ways possible in the institutional arena, to push harder towards his main also electoral campaign, which was the Constituent Assembly. And he did it. And he did it in a country that then was more right wing than what we have right now. So institutionally talking. So that's my opinion about the situation in Peru. I don't know what is going to happen. I believe that Castillo have to face a very tough, battles now that they are demanding in the Congress, asking for promoting this vacancy of him, the same way that they did with Vizcarra a few months ago. So I believe that won't prosper too much, but the right wingers in Peru are very powerful. It's a very conservative society embedded with that still colonial structure that is absolutely powerful. And anyway, I believe that is going to be a hard situation for him, but I still have hope that he might, overcome the situation and push for the things that he promised. Because if they spend all the time trying to make happy the right wingers, and he forget about the promises that the Peruvians voted for, he's gonna be hated by the right wingers as they always have been hating him. But he also is going to be hated by the people that voted for him, and that's going to be the end. In the case of Bolivia, the situation is, I believe that is, at least from my perspective, is better for Luis Arce. I mean, he have institutionally talking a better, control of the country, especially, after the coup d'etat against Evo, and then the dictatorship of Jeanine Áñez, and
Who's
and
in sorry to interrupt, but she's in prison right now, and is being prosecuted for her
Yes.
involvement in the coup, right?
yes, and in the massacres, mostly in the
Mm.
Sacaba and Sencata massacres, where more than 40 or 50 Bolivian supporters of Evo were killed, like like bunnies. So because of that, and they are trying to portray her like the
As
an
a political
angel that
prisoner.
fall from the sky, and then she's the victim of the bad mass and Evo and Luis Arce. But the situation in Bolivia seems for me a little bit less complicated. And Luis Arce, I believe that have a very good managerial skills. I mean, he's a good manager, he's a good administrator, and Bolivia is starting to show very good numbers in economy and dealing with the pandemic, which were very tough, political, issues for in the electoral debate. And I believe that in his case, the situation is way better than Pedro Castillo, but you have to take into consideration all those right-wing separative movements that are pushing a lot, trying to destabilize, repeating the same script that they use against Evo Morales. But right now, I mean, most of Bolivians know what happened in 2019, and I believe I'm under the impression that they won't allow 2019 to be repeated. And that's why, Evo and Mas had this massive march that ended a few days ago in La Paz with they talk about 1.5 million people marching in La Paz. It was a huge march. I saw some images of drones, looking, pointing at the people marching in the street of La Paz, and that was amazing. Endless number of people arriving to La Paz to support Luis Arce and Evo Morales and the socialist project. So in that sense, I'm more optimistic. And then you ask about Honduras, and that's amazing. I mean, the victory of Xiomara Castro is great. We had a panel in Orinoco Tribune a few days ago, and Vicky Cervantes, and also Sebastián Funes Ramiro also talked to us about the situation. And everyone is excited about the victory. That's another element that adds to what some people call the pink tide, but basically add to the leftist government in the region. And I'm pretty sure that it's gonna be, she's gonna take, it looks like she's gonna take decisions moving Honduras towards socialism, but always we have to be afraid of the US that really believes Central America belongs to them, and they have to move very strategically, carefully in order to move to the left, but trying to bypass or deflect or something the attacks from the US. So and we have to still see how is going to be the correlation of the forces in the National Assembly in Honduras also, which is always very important if you want to advance your agenda. And until today, I haven't seen those numbers. So that's my brief view about about those three countries. I don't know if you want to add something, sorry.
It's the new president. Yeah, just very quickly, the new president of Honduras, is she? Was she the wife of the ousted leader, Manuel
Zelaya.
Zelaya? Yep, Zelayas.
Yes.
Yeah, she was the wife. She is the wife of Manuel Zelaya, and when Manuel Zelaya was ousted, like along with her husband, she and her children were also like all taken to Costa Rica, where they were dropped unceremoniously, and from there they like they made their way back to Nicaragua and then clandestinely returned to Honduras by way of Venezuela and a lot of places. So like she suffered a lot. So like even like just like all Hondurans suffered, like there were massive migration and everything and criminalization. Like Xiomara Castro, I was listening to her, and she was saying that the US made Honduras a mini Colombia in Central America in terms of drugs. So that's a big thing that they have to fight. Like there are drug gangs, just like there are in Mexico or Colombia. There are these things that control entire areas of cities, and she has to fight them. Apart from the fact that there is no infrastructure. And like Jesus was saying, I also have not seen the numbers of National Assembly. I think that results will be available within 2-3 days, like this week. I hope so. There were a lot of elections in Honduras all together, actually, like the presidential election, the National Assembly, then the local assemblies, as well as municipal elections. So like a lot of elections, a lot of results to come, and it always depends on what the composition of the National Assembly is. Xiomara Castro has also promised a constituent assembly in Honduras to rewrite the constitution, just like Pedro Castillo had promised. Now, in case of Castillo, in many ways, his hands are tied because of the National Assembly. They have like out of 130, there are 130 Congress people in their parliament, and they have like 56. So that's less than half. That's counting the 7 from Juntos por el Perú, which is like Veronica Mendoza's organization. She was a candidate, and then she supported Castillo in the second round, and that is a coalition that they have, and they both promised constituent assemblies. Now, at present, I don't think the constituent assembly question will pass through the parliament. So what is happening in Peru is that Peru Libre, which is Castillo's party, is collecting signatures. Like they have this, there is this law everywhere that you have to reach a certain amount of signatures, like certain amount of voters signing for the Constituent Assembly in order for that to go into the parliament. So if they have that number of signatures, it will be easier. Now there has been, just like there is a media war against Castillo himself, there is a media war against his party also, Peru Libre. Like Peru Libre is being cast as this terrorist organization and at the same time as a corrupt, and many also call it a regionalist organization. Now when they say regionalist in Peru, one has to remember that Peru is a deeply divided country between the urban Lima, the capital, and the rural. So most people live in the rural regions, but they do not have a voice. It's the elite of Lima that have controlled this country for 200 years. So this is the first time in 200 years that a rural person is the president. So that is why there was a lot of hope that their voices will be heard by, like in the parliament. They will be, their wishes will be translated to laws. Now that is still to come. And in my opinion, Pedro Castillo has been making a lot of mistakes by giving in to these coup mongers, in the sense that he has been in the OAS, like the Organization of American States, that had fomented the coup in Bolivia, and that, of course, from which Nicaragua recently went out. Anyway, so Castillo went to OAS and he said that because OAS has recognized his victory, he thanked OAS, which is like terrible. So a lot of people, even like supporters of Castillo, were very upset about it, and there are reasons to be upset, because like some time ago we had Justin Podur on a panel, and he said that you should not be giving grounds to the empire, because if you do that, you are opening the path to your own overthrow. And that is exactly what is happening in Peru. It started with removing his own foreign affairs minister, Hector Bejar, whom we also had, like not we, but an associated organization had for an interview, and that like he was someone who should, like if he had been in the foreign affairs ministry, yet in my opinion, Peru would have like Lima group would have disappeared altogether. It's decomposing, but Peru is not saying anything about it anymore. Then it should have better relations with Venezuela. Yes, the Venezuelan ambassador is now in Peru after a long time, but the Peruvian ambassador, who was supposed to be in Venezuela, has been like stopped from doing so by lawfare. Like there is a case against him saying that he has taken money or bribes or something, and so he has not been able to go to Venezuela, and that's a mess. So that's something. Then over the last 100 days of his government, there have been so many changes of ministers that there is this idea that he cannot even settle a government. How can he settle a country? So that's a big problem. Like he is not giving a good image of himself, Castillo, and he should think about it. Some people should give him good advice. That's my opinion. And you are saying what? I talked about Honduras already. So what is missing? Bolivia. Okay, so Bolivia, this is summed it up very well. I don't have anything more to add, except the fact that just like Jeanine Áñez is being prosecuted correctly for her crimes, Luis Fernando Camacho, who is the governor of Santa Cruz, should never have been allowed to run for government. Like in Santa Cruz, when they had the regional elections, he should never have been allowed to run, because he was also one of those who did the coup. Like he proudly, there are videos of him saying that his father knows the people in the army, and his father was very close to the Bansar dictatorship in the 70s, like during the Operation Condor in South America. So he said that his father knows people in the high up in the army. He knows people high up in the army, and he can like change governments. He has the power, etc. And he did. Like he marched with people from Santa Cruz to La Paz, and although he was like no person of the executive, he marched into the presidential palace, and like then he and Arturo Murillo and others proclaimed Áñez the president. So he was one of the leaders of the coup, and he should be prosecuted, just like Áñez is, and just like Bolivia is also trying to extradite Arturo Murillo back from the US. So like this person should never have been allowed. And that, in my opinion, has been one of the mistakes, like very few, but a grave mistake of Luis Arce's government. This person should never have been allowed to run for president. The governor.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And hopefully, hopefully the current government recognizes this, and hopefully he pays for his epic crimes against humanity that was inflicted on the people of Bolivia for a year. Now, my second to last question, Saheli, can you talk to us about an RT article that was republished on Orinoco Tribune, in which WikiLeaks and its media partners revealed that that this new far right party in Spain called Vox, a lot of their money came from big business and from very respectable big businesses in Spain. Talk to us about that, because I find that very interesting, and I think the similarities between where the center to far right get their money from in Latin America, it's very similar to what WikiLeaks and its media partners revealed about where Vox got their money from. So talk to us about that, because I thought that was fascinating, and I'm stunned that it's not gotten more attention. I'm just surprised it's not gotten more attention. So talk to us about that.
Okay, so I think it did not get, first addressing the question of attention, I think it did not get attention because in general WikiLeaks is not being given attention these days in mainstream media. It's an organization that's being called hostile and everything. So even Julian Assange's own trial and like the extradition trial and then the US appeal, they did not get much attention in mainstream media either, right? In fact, in the very same newspapers that partnered in the revelations back in 2010, 2011, I'm talking of New York Times, I'm talking of The Guardian, I'm talking of the Washington Post, they did not pay any attention as Assange is like dying in prison, let's say. So I'm sorry to say this, but that is the truth. He is like very ill and everything. So,
yeah. In fact, in fact, they threw him under the bus, and you were talking about NGOs like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch. They too also threw Julian Assange under the bus. They don't recognize him as a prisoner of conscience. So, and Julian and supporters of WikiLeaks free Julian Assange. Both 1+1 and Orinoco Tribune, we do stand in solidarity with Julian Assange, but yeah, continue on with what you say.
That's okay. So, like in August this year, there was this revelation done by WikiLeaks that Vox, the Spanish far-right party that was founded in only 2013, but it's already the third largest force in the Spanish parliament. How did they begin? How did they get this money to begin? Because that money came before. That money came in 2012, and the party started in 2013. So I'm talking about this, like Vox. If we talk about Vox, and if you go to their homepage, it's everywhere. You'll see that they call themselves a conservative party. But if you go into the conservatism, you'll say that they uphold family values and Christian values, or what they consider to be Christian values. And when I say what they consider to be Christian values are really like somewhat medieval values, because they are against women's rights, they are against women's reproductive rights, they are against marriage equality, they are against even something like divorce or euthanasia, which are weird. Like even against being against divorce is something terribly medieval. Okay, even the church,
so even I underestimated how far right and reactionary they are.
Yes, that's how far right and reactionary they are. So like even the church from the Catholic Church from 1962 to 1965 held a series of deliberations and came out with a resolution in which they recognized the limitations of the power of the church in modern times. They said that they cannot be The church cannot no longer be a political force in this world, and that states have rights and people have personal rights which the church has to recognize. So there are these organizations that are even to the right of the Catholic Church and wish to write their own policies into laws. So Vox is one of those parties, and it was like supported or let's say founded by organizations like that, like these ultra-Catholic, ultra-conservative organizations. So in order to talk about Vox, we have to return to 2001. There is this organization called, like, its precursor, or we can always also say that it's its ideological parent. It's this organization based in Spain. It's called Hazte Oír, which means like get your voice heard or something like that. So Hazte Oír was founded in 2001 by someone called Ignacio Arzuaga Rato, who is a nephew of a former like Deputy Prime Minister of Spain, Rodrigo Rato, who is now in prison on charges of corruption. So you get from the beginning who these people are. So Ignacio Arzuaga initially, like his organization, it's one of those very ultra-conservative, ultra-Catholic organizations, like which would remind you of the Taliban, to be talking about them. So this organization initially supported the Partido Popular, the Popular Party of Spain, which is like the Republican Party of Spain, if we had to make a very simplified comparison. Anyway.
Yeah, the traditional center-right party.
Initially, it supported the Partido Popular, but in 2012, it considered that the Prime Minister of Spain, Mariano Rajoy, at that time, was not really as conservative as they liked. He is terribly conservative, in my opinion, and also Jesus' opinion too. But they think that he is not as conservative. Now, in 2012, something interesting happened. There is this organization based in Rockford, Illinois, called the Howard Center for Family, Religion, and Society. It's a very ultra-conservative organization, gets a lot of money from US conservatives. So this organization every year does a conference called the World Family Congress. So it is a lobby group actually that pushes for laws that are aligned with their ideals. So you have all these, for example, the anti-abortion marches in the US or the laws that are coming up. You might be certain that the Howard Center is behind it. So this Howard Center in 2012, it collaborated with Hazte Oír and had this World Family Congress in Madrid. And it is in this Congress that all these respectable business people gave their money. So Hazte Oír itself says something like this in its website, like where does Hazte Oír get its money? And it says this, I'll make a translation, that Hazte Oír is financed uniquely and exclusively with the support and donations of its members and people who wish to help us. We have almost 7,000 members, more than 20,000 collaborators, and more than 400,000 supporters. So that is what they declare in their website. So then, of course, one would like to take a look at the supporters and collaborators and members. So it is this thing that WikiLeaks revealed, that this, where does this support and donations come from? Yes, it does have small donations from people in countries as diverse as UK, Belgium, Switzerland, Italy, Spain, and Germany. And then on the other side of the Atlantic, there are people from Canada, from the US, from Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, Chile, etc. So there is all these countries from which people have given small donations. So they are probably among those 400,000 supporters. But there is another list with the headline "Big, Big Donors." Yes, that is the word, big, big donors. So this is the list in which all these respectable people appear. So there are the names of 209 persons, all of them either formerly or still in charge of some of the biggest corporations, not only of Europe, but also of the world. So the first name that appeared in that list was that of a person who has passed away now. It's Isidoro Alvarez. He passed away in 2014. So he was the owner and CEO of this group called El Corte Inglés, which is the largest department store chain in Europe. So it has department stores in almost all countries of Europe. And it has said that it has its net worth is close to 700 million. That's its net worth, the company. And it's in a terrible state now, his 7 children are fighting over the fortune. But anyway, so at that time, in 2012, for the World Family Congress, he gave a big donation. Then another person whose name is just after his name is Esther Koplowitz. She, at that time, was the president of this construction company called Fomento de Construcciones y Contratas in Spain. And she is also the owner of Ritz Hotels. So Ritz Hotels, famous, all the luxurious hotels in all the big cities of Europe. Right? So she is also the owner of that. And she is a billionaire, not even a multimillionaire. She's a billionaire, according to Forbes in 2019, before the pandemic. And you know how the rich have become more rich in the pandemic. So I don't know what her net worth is now. So that is another person. Then you had this person called David Alvarez Diaz. He is also passed away in 2015. And he was the CEO of this company called Grupo Eulen. So Eulen Group in its website says that it provides comprehensive service to companies, institutions, and governments. Now, comprehensive service is it advises them on economic, political questions, corporations as well as governments. And it is in 14 countries in the world, it has branches, including in the US, Peru, and Colombia. So on the others are in European countries. Then there was the name of a former finance minister of Spain, Juan Miguel Villarmir. He was also the former owner of the construction company OHL. So, and there are many corruption charges against him and against his company, as you can imagine. Then there is the name of Bernard Mounier, who at present is the deputy executive director of Nestle. And in 2012, when he was giving the donation to the World Family Congress thing, he was the director of its Nestle's Spanish subsidiary called the Nestle Peninsula Ibérica. And then there are many other people. I got names of many. Then there is this person called Ignacio Esquer de Oñate. He was in the board of director of the company called Fertiberia, which is a Spanish fertilizer multinational. And then there was this group, organization called Agencia Negociadora, which gives mortgages and loans. And its director, Javier Javaloyes, also gave money to this World Family Congress. And then there was this real estate administrator, Luis Villaclara Pont, who gave and when I'm talking about money, I'm talking about euros in tens or hundreds of thousands. So you can imagine the amount they gave only for that Congress. They gave even more later, but for that Congress, which was the start of Vox, so that was something that they gave. So with that money that the World Family Congress did get, it announced that it had got some 3 million euros in donation at that time in 2012. So with that, Vox was started. And in 2013, Asteroid also started its tried to branch out to countries that were not Spanish speaking ones with this organization called Citizen Go. So Citizen Go is in English, the website is in English, but you can also have it in a number of other languages, including German, Italian, French, Russian, and others. So they have, if you go to their website, you will see that they have all these printable, downloadable banners, okay, saying stuff like, you have the right to life, you do not have the right to kill. That's an anti-abortion message they have, which you can download and print in banners or placards and go into the streets with it. So with these groups, what they do, most of the things they do online, the petition online, they even write to UN, UN Human Rights Council or the High Commissioner, etc., trying to lobby them. But they have also turn things on the streets, especially in Spain and also in the US. Okay, so where they had like this orange buses going out, which is like mentioned in that WikiLeaks, like the leak is mentioned with photos and everything, that these orange buses with very transphobic messages going out. And then they claim that, okay, this is just a bus, you cannot tell us anything. And they had in some cities in the US, they had intense confrontations with rights groups. So it is how the thing came to light in 2017. But then in a court in Illinois, I believe, said that these things cannot be published online, like the confrontations and everything that took place, the photos that they had taken of those buses with the messages or the leaflets that they're giving out. So this is like, these groups, not only are they like doing things like doing marches or things trying to lobby, but they are also in power through Vox, which has 52 congressmen and women in the Spanish Assembly. And it also has 4 deputies in the European Parliament. So these people, there are like all these people there. And it has also like a big relation with Partido Popular. With Partido Popular, it governs the community of Madrid, and it also governs Andalusia. So like Andalusia is the most populated and largest region of Spain. It in 2018 in the regional elections, it got 11% of the vote in Andalusia. So that's big. And in like the recent Community of Madrid election, in which Podemos lost big, it was not in power, but it lost terribly, like had even lost votes. A lot of those votes, maybe not those votes, but a lot of votes were gained by Vox, which became the second largest force in the Community of Madrid. And since nobody had 50% seats, so it got into this alliance with Partido Popular, and it is turning Partido Popular even more right than it originally was. So it's trying to turn the entire Spanish, like Spain's political spectrum to the right, very similar to, like, they have aspirations of power. Of course, every political party would. So they have aspirations of power, like Viktor Orban is in Hungary, for example. So without these people giving money, the organization could not have started, or Citizen Go could not have come into existence. And Vox essentially is trying to, let's say, globalize itself by going into Latin America. It's especially been in Mexico, but its target is also Peru, which has also been in Peru. And the day after Castillo won, not the day after, but a bit like 2-3 days afterwards, when the trends became clear that Castillo was going to win, the Spanish monarchist newspaper ABC wrote something like this, that Bolivarianism extends its power through Iberoamerica. Okay, so it did not mention Venezuela by name.
Repeat that again. Well, what did they say? So Vox said that Bolivarianism
Bolivarianism extends its power through Iberoamerica. So they are obsessed with Iberoamerica. Like, they think that saying Iberoamerica gives them a say in Latin America. But anyway, so they're obsessed, and they say Bolivarianism, and they did the subheading goes like this. I'm trying to translate that: the success of Castillo in Peru adds Peru to the radical right that is governing Bolivia, Nicaragua, Mexico, and Argentina, and is destabilizing Chile and Colombia, as if Chile and Colombia need destabilizing from outside. So this is what Vox had said. And a month after the revelations by WikiLeaks, they're shameless. So in September, they were in Mexico. Vox's head president, Santiago Abascal, was in Mexico. And in the Mexican Senate, not anywhere else, but in the Senate, at the invitation of a senator named Julian Rementeria, who is from the Mexican right-wing party, Partido Acción Nacional. And it's very right-wing, okay? Not as right-wing as Vox, but quite right-wing, like Partido Popular. So at the request of this PAN senator, he was in the Mexican Senate, gave a speech, and there were 14 other senators of that party who like signed this document called Carta de Madrid. And like Carta de Madrid says something like Carta de Madrid in defense of liberty and democracy. So like these are the people who are going to defend liberty and democracy. And what this document mainly says is that it's trying to stop the progress of narco-communism in Latin America. No, not Latin America, they say Iberosphere. So trying to stop the progress of narco-communism in Iberosphere. And its definition of narco-communism is any government in any Ibero-American country that is to the left of center. Like even Alberto Fernandez, in their opinion, is a narco-communist. And why narco? Because in Vox's opinion, or at least in what Abascal says, is that these governments can only sustain themselves through narco trafficking. So he accuses Cuba, Bolivia, Nicaragua, Venezuela, Argentina, Mexico, all of these, the governments of being narco traffickers or narco governments, and also communists who are like trying to destabilize Chile and Colombia, and also like trying to extend its power throughout Iberosphere. So there are a lot of memes. There are a lot of memes with Iberosphere, like the word and him. But that is the fun part. The serious part is that they have money. So like what Vox is like trying to do in Latin America is cadre formation. So at least in case of Mexico, with FAN inviting them, that was the basic idea. And in October, like late October, early November, they had this program, like a leadership program, in which the Vox invited a number of young people from different Latin American countries. I have their list. That's their, like the leadership program consisted of these people going to Europe, visiting the Spanish Parliament at the invitation of his Vox's Spanish MEP, Herman Terch. I'm coming to Herman Terch in a bit, but at his invitation, the invitation was from him, that these people will go to the Spanish Parliament, will like listen to the speeches, will look at how Parliament works, and then they will also visit other institutions and like seminars, etc. And they will also visit a number of countries, including Hungary, where Viktor Orban is there as the prime minister, and his civic union, it's well known, is a neo-Nazi party. Then they were to go to Poland and meet the leaders of Law and Justice Party, which is another neo-Nazi organization. And they also went to France, where they met National Front, and National Front is well known for its fascism. So they met all these people in late, like in the last 2 weeks of October, the first 2 weeks of November. The person who was selected to go from Mexico was Alicia Galvan. She is an advisor, and like she's an advisor to this found senator from Guanajuato, Alejandra Noemi Reynoso Sanchez. And this person is like Alejandra Sanchez is a person who has been like who has been in a full frontal attack against the government of Andrés Manuel López Obrador. So calls him a communist. I wish you were, but anyway. So calls him a communist and says that like the like accuses the government of all sorts of things that it is not doing. And then there were others. The others were selected were from, look at the names just, Macarena Bravo, she was from Chile. Then there is this person called Angelo Bardini from Uruguay, and Cesar Enrique Reyes from El Salvador, Miguel Ángel Cetina from Colombia, Otto Solorzano from Guatemala, and Vania Thais from Peru. So they have also their eyes on Peru. They had criticized Castillo, called him bad things, like racist things, and also said that he had like insulted the King of Spain, etc. He hadn't, but according to them, they had, and they are very monarchist. These Vox, they don't believe in democracy. They want, well, Spain has a monarchy, but they all other countries of Ibero-America to be monarchist. So these people were all invited to go to Spain and to like take part in this leadership programs. Now, if you look at the profile or the career of these people, like of Alicia Galvan or any of the other people, there are some like certain similarities. all of them have been like privately educated, come from, because then you can understand they come from very rich families and also like powerful ones, and they are privately educated, and then they are close either to the government in case the government, there are right-wing governments in the country, or they are close to like powerful opposition figures in case the country has a left-wing government. So this Alicia Galvan, for example, she graduated from the Universidad Panamericana, which is an ultra-Catholic university in Mexico City, and also very expensive. And among its like notable alumni is the former president Enrique Peña Nieto. Then Macarena Bravo from Chile, I found out her profile and saw that she has a degree in education management from Universidad del Desarrollo, which is also a very which is a private university in Santiago de Chile with a second campus in Concepcion. It is the most expensive university in Chile, and when I say expensive, in Chile, education, even public education, is expensive because it's not really the government paying. There are like this system of coupons and student loans. So they are like, even in public education, Chilean students are under student debts like in the US. So she, coming from the most expensive university, you can easily understand. And she works in Piñera's government in the Ministry of Education in a program that is trying to like decrease the school dropout. So these like, and all others, like I'm not going into everyone, but everyone's career is like that. They have been educated in the most expensive universities in their own countries or even in the US. And they are all young people, like around 30 years of age. And so these are the people that Vox is trying to create leaders and then like send them back to their countries to have all these like extreme right-wing views and get elected to places of power where they can
trying to advance both fiscal conservatism and social conservatism.
Yes, because they're both. So they will try to do that. And like Latin America is a very fertile ground in that regard because you have had a number of military dictatorships all over, and you have the US money coming in, trying especially for these extreme right-wingers. So Vox has a fertile ground to work. Of course, Vox is not having as much success in Latin America as it wishes to, but still it could. So one has to be like vigilant about it.
And is it safe to say that the road, and Jesus, I would definitely love your perspective on this, coming from Latin America, that is it safe to say that the road to fascism is always paved with big money?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, are you asking? I mean, I believe that Sahili should be the one answering. Go ahead, Sahi.
No, actually, you can. Okay, so let's say something about money, since the question of money came up. Let's remember that although, like, apparently with this Vox thing, at least, the connection with the US is not that apparent. Like, I have not found any, but there might be, because there are people who are associated with these organizations that get money from the US and like money from National Endowment for Democracy, and they give billions of dollars every year to destabilize, for example, Cuba. Now you remember the 11 July protests. So in the 11 July protests, the organization that was behind it is an organization based in Miami called the Fundación para la Democracia Panamericana, headed by a Cuban, but a Cuban exile or expatriate, Rosa Maria Paya. She is the daughter of Osvaldo Paya, who led in the 90s a very right-wing Christian movement in Cuba. So this woman lives in Miami, has this organization, and just after the UN vote against the embargo, like every year that happens. So this year also happened, and then just like overwhelmingly in support of Cuba and against the embargo. A lot of people, a lot of US senators, including Marco Rubio, met her. And then there was Luis Almagro of OAS also with her. Like there are photos. where they probably came up with this idea of trying to have these protests. She never says, or her, at least like the website of the organization does not say how much money they get from USAID and NAD, but they say that they get money from USAID and NAD. So with this money, they financed the protests in Cuba, and it was like, how did anyone know that it was this organization getting money from the US? So I would recommend, like, there is this channel called Prensa Alternativa El Jota. It's like done by this guy called Juan José del Castillo from Peru. So he had no relation of Pedro Castillo, as far as I know, but he had these videos where he showed that the placards that appeared in the protests in Cuba in the 12 places was like said something called Cuba Decide, like Cuba decides. So this thing is actually, if you go to the website of this foundation, Rosa Maria's foundation, you will see that thing there. And it was there before, like since at least 15th of June, a month ago at that website. And also when she was meeting Luis Almagro, she had like a sort of packet in her hand with that same logo and the same words, Cuba Decide. So the fact that this organization can be related to those protests and hence to the US money, it is obvious to us, but it should be obvious, like even those who are skeptics, it should be obvious to them that this money was trying to pave the way towards right wing in Cuba. And it is here that I have to mention Herman Terch of Vox, and also another person about whom Jesus would like to say a lot, Leopoldo Lopez Hill, who is the father of Leopoldo Lopez, the Venezuelan fascist, who is in Spain now. So Leopoldo Lopez Hill is a European MEP from Partido Popular, but he is close to Vox, he is close to Herman Terch. And these two guys, two MEPs, received a prize as defenders of democracy and human rights from this Foundation for Pan-American Democracy. Just a bit before yes, a little bit before the protests in Cuba. So they got the prize. Another person who got this prize is Vita Charantsova, who is the vice president of the European Parliament. And she is this person who is trying to project Jeanine Áñez as a political prisoner and trying to push the European Union to impose sanctions on Bolivia for persecuting political prisoners. So these are the people. These are the very right-wing people, like Herman Terch, who says that the people of Latin America could never have developed had Spain not brought civilization to them. So this is Herman Terch. And then you have Leopoldo Lopez Hill, whose son is wanted in Venezuela for like a lot of crimes, including attempting coup and like organizing guarimbas and everything. So these people are associated with this Pan-American Democracy Organization, got prize in cash from them. And this organization also like pushes for democracy, a transition to democracy in Venezuela. So you have like this money, all this money coming mostly from the US, of course, through USAID, which is a CIA organization, and NED, which is also that. And also some European organizations. There is like equivalent European organizations, like similar to USAID in Germany and other countries. They also give them money. So yes, the path to fascism is paved by money. It's easy to understand that in order to, like, if you cannot destabilize a country through war, or through, like, if you cannot go to war, or if you cannot destabilize a country through the most brutal sanctions, you will pour in money to, in order to bolster opposition groups, give them weapons, even to the point that they will start a civil war.
Yeah, well, and I think what's very important about about what WikiLeaks, RT, and yeah, And I think what's also very important is that, yeah, the road to fascism is always paved with big money. You know, we saw with the Tea Party movement in the U.S. That was bankrolled by the Koch brothers, and so yeah, so very important. So thank you very much for explaining all of that. And yeah, and the far right is going global, and it's best not, and we should not be downplaying, the real threats to democracy. And so, Jesus, I know. We're going a bit over time, so it's probably a good place to close. But Jesus, just before you go, let me just ask you this very quick questionnaire, and you can give very brief responses to it. So before we go, in memory of James Lipton, Jesus, what is your favorite words? And you're on mute. You're on mute.
You mean my favorite word?
Yeah.
Justice, maybe? Socialism?
What's your least favorite word?
Hate?
Hate?
Hate.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh, that's also my father's least favorite word. What turns you on spiritually, spiritually or emotionally?
I didn't get the first part.
What inspires you? What turns you on emotionally or spiritually?
Beauty, nature.
And what turns you off?
What?
What turns you off? Like what do you really like?
Violence, hatred.
Yeah. What sound or noise do you love?
Waves.
What sound or noise do you hate?
Electric kind of noises.
What's your favorite curse words?
I don't know, like
It could be Spanish.
Coño.
Okay.
Equivalent to fog in English.
And if you weren't doing your profession, what profession would you love to do if you weren't doing journalism?
Journalism. I'm actually by profession a diplomat by profession, but what I do is like journalism. That's the thing that I like to do.
What profession and what profession would you not like to do under any circumstances?
Wow, that's a good question. Military, I believe. Anything related to the army.
And the last one before, and then the last one is: if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say as you arrive at the pearly gates?
I don't believe in God, but I hope that he should say, "Welcome home, man."
and then Saheli, before I let you go, what is your favorite words?
My my favorite words. That's difficult, but I think peace and solidarity.
Peace and solidarity. What's your least favorite word?
Least favorite word. Anything related with hate speeches. I hate hate speech.
And what inspires you emotionally and spiritually?
The thing that most inspires me is reading. Otherwise, I would not be giving you all this information.
And what turns you off?
That's difficult. That's difficult, really. I don't know.
Right wingers?
Well, actually, no. You have to you have to confront right wingers, so you have to be inspired by what they say.
Poverty, injustice.
Yeah, those things would be.
What sound or noise do you love?
Leaves, the sound of leaves.
What sound or noise do you hate?
What I hate? Shooting, bombing, etc. There is a lot that happens here.
And what's your favorite curse word?
I think I have to say them in my own language.
Go right ahead. Go right ahead.
Okay, so well, I'll not say the worst ones, but one which I use like almost every hour is pal, which is similar to the F word in English.
and what language is that? Because India has several languages. So
It's Bengali. It's Bengali.
Okay. And actually, are you based in Bangladesh, not India?
In India, yes, I'm in India, but my parents were from Bangladesh and had to, like, their families were uprooted in partition.
Okay. And what profession, if you weren't doing journalism, would you love to do?
Actually, I am not doing journalism really. I mean, this is a work that I do voluntarily out of love, but what is my education or career is physics. I'm doing a PhD in physics, like I'm almost at the point of receiving the degree. So yes, if I were not doing either teaching or journalism, I would like to do farming.
And that's perfect. And what profession would you not like to do?
What I would not like to do.
Yeah.
Anything that would involve killing people.
Perfect. And if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say as you arrive at the pearly gates?
So I am agnostic, but anyway, so if heaven exists and if there is a God, I would like them to say, like, what you have done something good in life, like to recognize what I have done in life.
Perfect. All right. Well, we are joined on this special edition of 1+1 with my guests, Jesus Rodriguez of Orinoco Tribune and Saheli Chowdhury, a contributor to Orinoco Press, Orinoco Tribune, on this All Things Latin America edition. The both of you, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope to have you both on again to discuss all things Latin America and other parts of the world. Thank you so much for joining me on this Sunday, and best wishes until then.
Thank you, Youri. Thank you for the invitation. I really enjoy it.
Likewise. Thank you. You're welcome.
Thanks a lot for inviting us. And also the fact that we have been able to give some insights into the truth of Venezuela and Latin America today.
It was a real honor. So thank you so much.